Sure, Mr. Elwood, I designed this particularly for students, but the way this is going to be, I'm going to talk for a little while. I'm going to lay a certain foundation, and then we can have just a conversation.
Sure.
And feel free to ask questions during the presentation. I'm totally okay with that.
All right. This will be a nice little intimate group that we have here.
Yes, which I like.
I'm okay with that. Chester Friel, Brother Chester was joining us for just a second there, I saw, and then he opted out. I don't think I'm that intimidating. I don't know if you guys know Brother Chet or not.
I don't.
He's former provincial of the Midwest province, and a great guy. He was on our board at Notre Dame, along with Nate Wills, who was still on our board.
Yes.
But maybe he'll join us back.
Wow. Welcome, Alice Kati, if I pronounce your last name correct. Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I'm late. I just looked at the clock and ran in.
We are just getting started. I was just telling Mr. Elwood, it's going to be a conversation. I am going to talk for a little while, but feel free to ask questions. I did gear this towards students, but hopefully you can get some information out of this, you know, and I will go ahead and start.
Do you prefer that we turn off our video, or is it okay to leave it on? What do you prefer?
It's totally okay to leave it on. It's okay. Totally fine.
I'll just mute myself.
Sure. You know, thank you for attending this workshop. I called it Racial Justice Mentoring, a Call to Action. Just a little bit about myself. I am Michael Rodriguez, Dr. Michael Rodriguez. I am a 18-year experienced educator. I fell into education. It was not my first choice, but once me and education met, we fell in love, and we've had a love affair for 18 plus years. I am currently the director of a program called the Men's Resource Center at Kingsborough Community College, which is located in Brooklyn, New York. It is a part of the City University of New York's Black Male Initiative Project. And what that means is there are 30 of these projects all across the City University of New York system. And mine is located in Brooklyn, and we are at a community college. I do have a Doctor of Education in Interdisciplinary Leadership from Creighton University. I am a professional college and career mentor outside of my work I do at Kingsborough. Most importantly, I'm a lifelong mentee. I love to learn. I think mentoring is so important to me. And when I think about mentoring, it really has, you know, really transformed my life. So I love talking about it. So hi. Hi. Now, in this workshop, we're going to examine the interrelationship between mentoring and racial justice movements. We're going to look at the connection. This presentation is really just an overview. We're not going to dig too deep into the weeds. But specifically for this workshop, I'd like the participants to consider how they can use mentoring to increase their knowledge and spread the word about social justice. First, I want to do some defining. What is mentoring? What is a mentor? Now, so many people have had mentors. The word mentoring is a buzzword now, has been for the last maybe 10, 15 years. But let's talk about what is mentoring? By definition, a mentor can be either a noun or a verb. As a noun, is an experienced and trusted advisor. And as a verb, you can use it to train in a sense of where you're training or advising someone. But why the term mentor? The actual word mentor. Why do we use that term? And I get excited when I learned this, but a little short history that some of you may know, but I love talking about it. In Homer's book, The Odyssey, that wonderful book we all kind of had to read in high school. And if you're like me, didn't understand. It's like, what? Okay. But I loved it. It was a great book when I really got to understand it. Now, mentor was a friend of the main character, Odysseus. Now, Odysseus left for the Trojan War, and he placed mentor, his friend, in charge of his son and his palace. Now, during the story, the goddess Athena disguised herself as mentor and offered advice to both Telemachus and Odysseus. And because of Mentor's relationship and the fact that Athena disguised herself and offered encouragement and practical advice in dealing with the personal dilemma, the name mentor has been adopted as a word that we use to describe somebody who imparts wisdom, shares knowledge with a less experienced colleague. I love that story. So based on this example, right, if we look at what most people think mentoring is based on the work of Homer. And traditionally, it is defined as the passing of information from one person to another. It is relationship based, but it has purpose. I think that's very important to understand. Mentoring is purposeful. It's not just a conversation. It is a conversation with purpose. Okay, now I'm gonna switch gears very briefly and talk about what is social justice. Racial justice. It's a systemic fair treatment of peoples of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. Racial justice or racial equality goes beyond anti-racism. Okay. Two words I want to point out when we define racial justice for this workshop. I want to look at the word systemic and the word equitable. So just for clarity, systemic refers to something that is spread throughout, affecting a group or a system, such as a body, economy, market, or society, right? So when we talk about things that are systemic, it is structural in nature. It is, you could say, institutional in nature, and that's important. Equitable means dealing fairly and equally with all concerned. And equal as the same measure, quantity, amount, or number as another. So when you talk about equity, you're talking about making things fair. Now, there is a difference between equity and equality. And this is important to understand, right? Because a lot of times in this work, people say, oh, well, let's make everything equal. Okay, let's just give everybody the same thing and we're all good. But if you look at this model, depending on who you are on this model, making everything even, like the picture on the left, doesn't really fix the problem. That's not what happens. Yes, you gave everything equal, but each individual on the left has a different issue. Some are taller, some are shorter. So making everything the same doesn't help. Equity is providing what each individual person needs or each individual group needs so that they all have an equal footing to move forward. Now, we've talked about, we defined mentoring. We talked about racial justice. Now, what is the relationship between mentoring and racial justice movements? Okay, now, one of the things I firmly believe is that mentoring can be a vehicle to pass along ideas, information, or strategies about social justice. A lot of times people use mentoring as a form of how do you pass on information about how to do well in college or how to do well in a class or how to learn a new skill. But mentoring in itself is simply a tool. And I think that's the power of mentoring. You use mentoring as you need it. And in our case, it can be used to pass along ideas of racial justice, information, and strategies. Okay. Now, here are a quick examples of how racial justice ideas are passed through mentoring. Now, most people know who Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was, Baptist minister and an activist who was the spokesperson for the Civil Rights Movement from 1955 until his death, 1968. But what most people may not know is his professor at Boston University, Dr. Howard Thurman, introduced him to the concept of nonviolence. So it was through their relationship, teacher-student, where this idea, this seed of nonviolence was passed through. And so many times in our experience, we kind of, as I get older, I tend to realize so many lessons I learned from my professors, from my teachers. So many of them mentored me, and I didn't recognize it as mentorship. So here's one example of mentorship and how this idea can be passed along. Right? Another is, you see this group here, you may recognize this gentleman right here, the tall gentleman right there. That is Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was a colleague of Dr. Martin Luther King. He's also a Baptist minister. Also, he later went on to found a social justice organization called National Rainbow Coalition. Now, when you think about Dr. Martin Luther King and you think about his associates, you have to realize there were a group of them around him. He did not do it by himself, right? But Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was much younger, was part of that group and was able to take some of the lessons he learned being part of that group and progress the civil rights movement. So now you have Reverend Jesse Jackson. And fast forward that to today, where his starting of the National Rainbows Coalition could set a template for something like Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, right? See how one group can start, and through the example of that group, now form another group to carry on the work of social justice. Now, these examples talk about not only the interrelationship, but also different types of mentoring that can happen. You can have one-on-one mentoring, and that would be Dr. Thurman, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. You could have group mentoring, Dr. Martin Luther King and his group of people who worked together during the civil rights movement. And then you have role modeling, right? Where the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement may not have had a direct connection to Reverend Jesse Jackson or even Dr. Martin Luther King, but through role modeling of what they did and what they accomplished and what they've started, you become a role model and a role modeling mentor. So there's different ways mentoring can be used to pass on information. I wanted to say that because it's important. A lot of times we have the traditional meaning of what mentoring is, but when we think about it, this mentoring can be done in so many ways and should be done in so many ways. It should be done through one-on-one mentorship. It should be done through group mentoring. And it should be done through role modeling, looking for examples of people out there who are doing the work that you want to do, who are doing the work that you're passionate about. And even if you never get to meet them, you can take a look and observe, read their works, watch their videos, study what they do and how they move and how they create what they want to create, and take those ideas and adopt them for yourself. It is totally okay to do that. I think it's important that we do that. Okay. Okay. Now, now's the time to really, I think, time to take action, right? How do you increase / become a racial justice ally? How do you do this? How do you use mentoring to do this? Okay. The first step, right? Find your niche. You have to find your niche. You have to define what it is you are going to promote, what it is you are going to fight for, what it is that you are going to try to make an impact and change. Because there are so many different areas where this can be done. Criminal justice, economic justice, affirmative action, American Indian rights. There's so many places you can go to really fight your fight, if you will. And that's one of the first things that has to be done, because you can't do it all. When I work with young people, I say, look, you can't do it all. You can't do everything. You can't fight this fight and that fight, right? You may be concerned about food insecurities, right? And, you know, it's interesting. In Brooklyn, it's changing, and it has changed. The Brooklyn I grew up in is honestly not the Brooklyn that many of the young people I work with are growing up in. There's a lot of gentrification, and you know, that's not a positive or a negative. It's just that's what's happening, right? But in this changing, you end up with what people call either food deserts, right, where there are a lack of healthy foods in walking distance or sometimes even driving distance, right? Or you have a food swamp, which is something I think that's what we really see in a place like Brooklyn, where the food you do have access within walking distance is not very good. It's not healthy. You go to your local market and the fruit is not fresh, right? You don't have access to fresh fish. You don't have access to the type of food you need to really be healthy. And if you come from a certain community where you don't have a car, and yes, New York has a wonderful subway system, but it still costs money to ride that subway system, right? So if that is your passion, fantastic. Fight that fight. Fight food insecurities, right? But you can't fight the food insecurity fight and fight the criminal justice fight at the same time. You stretch yourself too thin. And I see it all the time, especially from people who have a heart to serve and a heart to really make a difference and change. And I think it's so important that you do spend your life trying to create positive change in this world. But I encourage people, pick something. Just pick something. Trust me, there is somebody out there who's going to fight that other fight. There is. But you pick what fight you want to have. And I want to just open it up to discussion at this point, if anybody would like to add anything.
I would like to ask you, Dr. Rodriguez, how do you know if you're picking something that is too broad? You just said, you know, don't spread yourself thin. Is there any guidance you have for how to know whether something is realistic or not?
I would say ultimately what you want to do is try to boil it down to one sentence, right? What if you could boil your fight down to one sentence, I think that's a good place to start. I want to change, fill in the blank. Keep it very basic, keep it very simple.
Thank you.
You know, living in a culture where things revolve around what's trending, what I find the most difficult is focusing on knowing that the fight is going to be there for people, that it's not going to expire, that that social justice, racial inequality, and racial injustice is not a trend to be fought today that's just going to go away tomorrow. And I believe that, so I guess my question in that is, what would you advise a person to do in choice of a mentor to keep themselves energized in the face of the idea that these things might expire over time?
Well, one thing I would consider that I would ask you to really first talk about what do you mean by expire? Do you mean that the interest in the movement will expire
Yes.
or the particular thing? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because see, that's a tough one, right? Because
Right.
sometimes we jump on stuff because it's the hot new thing and it's the exciting thing, but it's not the thing that we're really passionate about. And that's why I think you got to take time to find your niche, right? Because again, that's another thing I see. So many young people, they join the hottest new whatever it is, and that's the cause I'm going to fight for. But ultimately, that's not what's in your heart. That's not what you're really passionate about, because in the back of your mind, you may not, because they're not talking about your thing, you think people are not interested in. One of my former students was absolutely, she loved whales. She loved whales. That's what she loved. But for the first year of her education, her in higher education, she wouldn't talk about it. I knew it because I was her advisor. And she was taking something like accounting or something. And I was, that's wonderful. That's fantastic. But her heart wasn't there, right? And I think if Al, you run across somebody like that, have that conversation to say, look, ultimately, you in any fight, you're going to feel alone, right? That's just going to happen. Whether it's the beginning of the fight, the middle of the fight, the end of the fight, you're going to feel isolated, right? That's par for the course. So find something that can push you and drive you when those moments come. When those low moments come, you find that thing that can push you. Her love for whales. She went on changing her major, went on to get a degree in marine biology, and is doing very well because through conversation, she was able to find that thing that honestly was not very popular. There's not many people where she's from in Brooklyn who are interested in whales. Okay.
Right.
So I think ultimately it's about, again, going back to really finding that passion and purpose in that thing, because you're going to need that level of passion that to push you when things get difficult. I hope I answered your question now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Then I kind of want to follow up on that. What would a person do to kind of bide their time while they're waiting on a convergence of the thing that they're most passionate about and their current circumstances that allow them to follow that passion?
I think preparation, and I'll talk a little bit of that in the next couple of steps, but preparation. You have to prepare yourself for your moment, right? So right now is not your moment. You have your interest, but you may not be in a place where you can launch yourself into that moment, right? Or you have not found that group that you can connect with to help launch you into that moment. But during that moment, it's really important for you to prepare yourself for that moment.
Great. Thank you.
That's really important. I'm going to talk about that in the next couple of steps.
Doctor, I'm having a little bit of trouble from my perspective. Perspective is the word I want to talk about explaining what has happened to me over the course of this past year when we've not been able to do much. You know, we sit around in our homes, for those of us who don't have children in the house, and just listen. And what has happened to me over the course of this past year has been a broadening in perspective, with respect specifically to the police killings, where before I would say, well, from my perspective, and I would see it didn't apply to me, and then I didn't see anything there, and maybe it was okay, and so forth. But with the number of these that we're seeing now, my perspective has changed incredibly. It's become a much broader, wide open, and I like to think a fairer perspective, at least a more equitable perspective, if I can put it that way, where I can see both sides now. And I will tell you that a year ago, I'm not so sure I could have. That has become an absolute passion with me. I'm not quite sure how to articulate of what that is or how I can act as a mentor in that regard. Can you offer a suggestion?
Yes, I will. And in fact, I'll go to my next step is to perhaps, Dr. Elwood, you may need to find someone who can pour into you a little bit. Although you have a lifetime of experience and knowledge, this particular topic may be new to you, right? And since it's new to you, you may need to reach out to somebody who can kind of guide you a little bit, inform you a little bit about what's happening or what's happened in the movement and what's the thinking for moving forward, right? So I would suggest find yourself a mentor who you can sit and talk to and have these conversations with, who, and it's so interesting, you know, you have a world of experience to give, but on this topic, you may need a little more education, perhaps, since it's new to you, as you say, or your perspective has just changed. You may need somebody to help fill in the gaps a little bit for you, or provide you a little more information, or just simply point you in the right direction where you can take all your experience, knowledge, and passion and push it into. That's really what I would suggest. Just find yourself a racial justice mentor, because that is the next step, right? You found this thing, or it's found you this past year, and you've come to an awakening, and now you're ready to act. But as you stated, if I'm hearing you correctly, you may not know exactly where to move into. Well, connect with a racial justice mentor who can help you kind of push. And that can be, if I was talking to students, I would say start at your school. I would say for anybody, start at your church or local worship center, wherever you congregate. One of the most interesting things about, for me, being a member of a church is, you know, we all come together for one particular thing on Sundays, let's say, but yet we all have these incredible, unique lives the rest of the week. And perhaps if we just have conversations with more people in our networks, we'll realize, wow, you know, Mr. Howard, you will find somebody who, 6 degrees of separation, who you can sit down and maybe have a cup of coffee every week with virtually, and just have these conversations through your networks, right? And I'd also maybe look into some professional organizations when you're ready to really kind of, make the move into whatever niche you are interested in.
I appreciate that. That's quite helpful.
Thank you. I was hoping I answered your question. Okay. The third step, and this is something I think that may speak to something Al mentioned earlier. While you're discovering your niche, and once you discovered your niche and you have connected with somebody or a group, learn the language of that organization. Learn the language of the movement. Learn the language. And that's how, going back to what Al said earlier, that's one of the things you do while you're waiting for everything to converge. You learn the language. You learn what an ally is. You learn what implicit bias is. You learn about restorative justice. These are just some key common words in racial justice movements now that all of us may not be aware of, but it's important to just really start to understand the language, right? And I think language is so important. It just amazes me that every movement, every niche, let me go back to the words that I was using, every niche has its own language. And if you're going to be involved in the niche, if you're going to be involved in whatever it is, you got to learn the language. And that's a big step, right? Because not everybody really considers that part. It's very difficult to be a part of I'll go back to a food insecurity movement. And if I throw out the term food desert, you don't know what I'm talking about, right? There's nothing wrong with that at first, but it's important that at some point you start to really study and analyze and really take a look at what language people are using and why they use it. Sometimes, when I first got into this type of work, Now it's interesting. Here's one of the things that I find personally fascinating for myself. The program that I run is a mentoring program. We are charged with helping our students graduate our community college. But because our target population is African American and Latino males, when I first started this work 10 years ago, I quickly realized I had to learn the language of racial justice. Because before that, I was just an educator. Yes, I'm a Black man, and I'm very aware of what's happening around me in the world, but in the spirit of transparency, 10 years ago, I didn't know the language. And I'm sitting here working with predominant Black and Latino males, and the world is changing so quickly in the past 10 years of everything that happened. I quickly realized, oh my goodness, Mike, you got to step back and learn this language, because you have these young people coming to you, asking you questions, who are curious, who want to have these conversations, right? And some of them knew the language better than me. So it's very important to take time and learn the language of the movement that you're going to be interested in. And I just put, yes.
Excuse me, I was going to say, this is not much different than becoming a Holy Cross educator. It truly isn't. When I came to Notre Dame College Prep in Niles as a president, I had never worked in a school before. So I had to learn what it meant to be the president of a school. And I had no experience with the Holy Cross charism. But the first thing that became apparent to me is I had to learn the language of Holy Cross. And it's a very specific thing for Holy Cross educators. Once you learn the language, then role modeling, instructing, all the other things follow from that as an educator become very easy. And I can see how that makes all the difference in the world here, Doc. Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing, because you're right. This is something that I think we all do in some different ways, right? We've done this at some point in our life. We stepped on into a new organization or stepped on a new job. And now you have to learn this new language. But for some reason, well, it's the same way when it comes to social justice movements or any movement. You got to learn the language. You got to learn the lingo. I put up implicit bias as a definition as well. I'll give you a moment to read it. Put up restorative justice. And actually, just for the sake of the video, I'll read it. Restorative justice is a theory of justice that emphasizes repairing the harm caused by crime and conflict. It places decisions in the hands of those who have been most affected by the wrongdoing. And it gives equal concern to the victim, the offender, and the surrounding community. Restorative responses are meant to repair harm, heal broken relationships, and address the underlying reasons for the offense. Restorative justice emphasizes individual and collective accountability. Crime and conflict generate opportunities to build community and increase grassroots power when restorative practices are employed. I personally love that definition. I love the idea of restorative justice, because you're not just dealing with the punitive matter, right? You're not just there to condemn the person, but you're there to really start conversations about what happened and why it happened. And does the person who committed the crime understand what happened? Do you really understand what happened and the harm you caused? Do you see this person or people sitting in front of you as real people? They're humans just like you. And if you understand that, perhaps you can be transformed in a way that you will no longer commit that crime, because now this person in front of you is a person who has feelings and emotion and who you can empathize with, or excuse me, you can relate to in a way that makes them human and makes them real, right?
It's so closely connected to our Catholic faith, if you think about it, right? The whole thing about repairing the harm. It's sin, right? It's redemption from sin, essentially, right? That destroys that relationship with God, and this is what destroys that relationship with each other. I mean, this should be just such a main focus of all of our Catholic schools, and yet, as Catholic educators, we know in our high schools, it's so old school, right? We're all about the rules and the discipline, and the hair has to be a certain way, and the whole 9 yards. Yet, if we really look at our Catholic faith and our Catholic tradition, restorative justice is probably more congruent to who we are.
Absolutely. It's it's interesting, right? We create institutions there to help our young people, right? And ultimately, that's what we want to do. But in the creation and in the formation, and once they start running, because we love our young people, we want to provide them with discipline, and we want to make sure that they understand that there's rules in the world, and we want to prepare you for those rules in the world, and we want to equip you to function as a whole human being, and we want you to be healthy and whole. So we set these parameters for you not to hurt you, right? That's really what we do. But it's so much more than that. There's a way we do that that doesn't have to be authoritative, right? It doesn't have to be dictatorial. We don't have to. And it's funny, I understand. It's because we love our young people, we do this. We set these rules up because we love you. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to see you go in the world to be hurt. That's not what I want. So I'm going to set up these rules for you, and never take the time to really help them understand what's the purpose behind the rules, right? Why do we do what we do? Why do we set things up this way? It's not to harm you. And let's have this conversation, because I've met young people who honestly think rules hurt them. They don't want any rules because they felt like they've been in bondage, not realizing that these rules are really there to provide you a freedom of expression that doesn't offend other people, that doesn't get you hurt. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That was a great example. Thank you. So, in review, mentoring is the passing on of information, one source to another. Racial justice is the fair and systematic treatment of all people of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. And the review of the action steps: find your niche, find that thing that stirs you up, find that thing that sets you on fire, find that thing that awakens you. And once you do that, learn the language of racial justice. Take time to learn the language and find yourself a social justice mentor. Thank you, guys. I know we have a lot more time, but we can definitely continue the conversation.
I've got something that I'd love to jump in and maybe explore, and maybe others can help. So my concern, or my passion, my niche is I'm a principal at a predominantly white institution. Faculty is predominantly white. Notre Dame High School, Sherman Oaks, California. It was an all boys institution, went co-ed in the 80s. But the San Fernando Valley for generations has been predominantly white post World War II. It is changing recently. And so we have more students of color than ever before, and we're moving in that direction, but it's been harder to bring diversity to the faculty. We are working on issues of DEI. We're hiring a DEI coordinator for next year. So we're moving in that direction. There are some faculty that are lockstep with me and moving in that direction and you know, with me. There are others that are very resilient, that make it very challenging. And so my niche is that I want to increase diversity among faculty as well as diversity among students. And when I look at students, I'm going to be real with you. We all know that we give the high school placement test. We all know as educators that standardized tests are biased. They just are. I'm just never going to believe that they're not. We know that you can be taught. We know that you can be prepped and packaged and whatnot. We know that not every child has those resources. And so all of this is to say that this incoming freshman class, and I haven't had this conversation with my faculty, but we really made an effort to admit as many students of color as we could, regardless of what test scores look like. And my fear is in rolling that out, because we're going to need to do some support this summer for students coming in, I don't want to perpetuate another stereotype. And by that, I mean, when I say to my faculty, this is important to me that we increase the diversity. And as a result, we're going to need to do a little bit more work in the summer with some of these kids, et cetera. My fear is that those that are hesitant are going to equate students of color as being less than. And I go back to the equity and equality picture that you had, Dr. Rodriguez, right? So I get it. I totally get it. How do I roll this out? How do I mentor my faculty in such a way so that they're not fueling the stereotype, but seeing it through the lens of equity and equality? Does that make sense? I mean, that's what keeps me up at night.
That does make sense, and that would also keep me up at night. That is it.
Any thoughts on that? How you mentor without doing damage, and how I mentor these incoming students and provide mentorship without them feeling less than, because, you know, maybe their white counterparts aren't having this kind of a mentorship program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must commend you on recognizing the fact that some of your incoming students of color can feel isolated and ultimately less than because they're in a special program. Right. I really commend you for recognizing that. I've been in programs that do not recognize that, and they think, well, let's just start this special program and let's open it up and they'll love it. And it's right. Wait a minute. They're not, they're not dumb kids. They realize I'm in a special program. What's the common denominator here about this special program? Oh, we're all people of color, so we all need help, right? So I definitely commend you on recognizing that. And again, I don't have any concrete answers, but I would really encourage you to work with your staff, because they're going to be the ones in that classroom who will hopefully be able to see what's happening among the students, and they're going to be your touch point for a lot of what's happening in the classroom that you may not see, right? They'll hear the conversations that you won't hear, right? And you may want to select a group of your current students who are student leaders or can be student leaders and give them some training, right? So that way they can step in and kind of model some of the things that you want to happen and you want to see, right? Because again, that's another layer of conversations where your teachers won't be there, you're not there, administrators there, but all students are there. And that's another level of conversation that needs to be dealt with. So that's one thing I would recommend. Really work with some student leaders and get them the training they need to really kind of understand what is it you ultimately want, and be open and honest about it and say, look, these are some of the pitfalls, right?
Would you suggest that the student leaders be students of color specifically, or do you think that also plays into that?
That also plays into that. So they definitely do not have to be students of color.
Okay.
Right? Because also It's really about if you can find students who are just naturally interested in this type of work,
In leadership.
right?
Yeah.
You can kind of help them kind of develop. And honestly, they should not be all students of color, right? You know, because you're going to need students to model how to be an ally, right? You're going to need students who are not students of color to model how to be an anti-racist. You're going to need that, right? So yeah, they definitely should not be students of only of color.
I even push that a little further and ask ourselves a question that we probably have all asked ourselves over the years. How much of our faculty and staff, how diverse is that group? Because in most of our schools, if not all of them, our faculty and staff do not look like our student body.
Absolutely.
And maybe we should start there by focusing more heavily on making sure that we have a representative faculty, representative with respect to our student body. That's a good place to start. That starts balancing the numbers out a lot easier. I mean, it's hard to explain why a kid should go to a school where there's no faculty or staff that look like him. In our case, it's an all-boys school, so I use him pretty much exclusively. Forgive me for that.
No, that's okay. Rod.
I think that's a good question. I mean, a real challenge that we all have, because all of our schools are like this. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Alice, I don't know anything about your Notre Dame, which we like to refer to as the other Notre Dame. Or just like the one in South Bend, we call the other Notre Dame too. But our faculty is almost exclusively white.
Well, and part of the problem, Ralph, is, let's be honest, when Dr. Rodriguez said, church is a resource, our church is lily white. The Black Catholic community is not as large. And I think that is an untapped resource for us, that we ought to be looking to as Catholics during this time. But that's part of the problem. If we say we're only going to hire Catholics, most of my Black friends and family are Baptist or AME. They're not Catholic. And so I think we have to give and not be committed to just hiring Catholic people.
Oh, well,
Right?
I don't know any school that should have that sort of restriction. In
Right.
the Chicago Archdiocese, the only practicing Catholics have to be the president, the principal, and the religion teachers. Those are the only ones. And I don't care what anybody else's religion or sexual orientation is or anything else. It's just not important to me. But I do care about the diversity of the rest of us.
Yeah.
That's in our school, it's unforgivable.
I'd like to add that we, about 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting to just discuss the climate and do a SWOT analysis for Gilmore Academy there in Indiana with Kathleen Kinney. I don't know if you all know her, but they're off to a very good start in handling some of the themes and challenges, Alice, that you mentioned. Specifically, they just recently had a DEI appointee, Nanetta Hullum, and she's gotten off to a really good start with the students, getting them to know from even the pre-grade school years, into on up into second and third grade, describing difference and understanding difference. Who at home has a mommy and daddy who may not be the same color, who at home has two mommies, who at home has two daddies, whatever. Getting them to understand those things, and then kind of just massaging that straight through to their 18-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got a lot of different initiatives there and things like that. And so what I would say in regards to that for you guys, and I'm not in a position to necessarily give overarching advice, but I really would recommend that you connect with Kathleen. That's and cool. And I mean, because they're very excited, they're very energized, even their faculty, they're energized about these new things that they're doing. And when we got to the weaknesses part of our analysis, what was discovered was really more of an exploitation of the socioeconomic difference that exists in their community. That largely the reason why their school population is more homogeneous on the white side is the price of tuition.
Yes.
The ticket price altogether needs to be explored, and not necessarily to a point where we lower tuition, but she did say that bridging the gap with community there may assist in getting maybe some key members of the community or some key members of the community business association there to to start incentivizing that for students. In my own personal experience, I remember going to school in elementary school when students, when they first started the free and reduced lunch program. And of course, I was blessed enough to be able to have a sack lunch, or on the days that my dad might give me 50 cents or whatever, or 75 cents to go in there and I could pay for my lunch. But there were some kids, of course, who
Yeah.
didn't, couldn't get that. And so that actually circles back to the food disparity issue that Dr. Rodriguez was talking about earlier, because we had then an enforced difference. Those students who had to rely on that program just so they could eat were then starving themselves because they didn't want to be embarrassed that they had to pull out a free lunch card when they got to the checkout line. And they would basically, literally, these are kids who would not use the lunch card, would have X amount of money saved up on that lunch card, and they just would not use it because they get ridiculed and teased so much at the lunch line, which is a shame. So who was there to ally for them? Because this is 1978. but this, I mean, there is those issues and dynamics that exist at the student level where peer-to-peer, they need to be, there needs to be some sponsorship to teach kids necessarily how to treat one another in there. And this ties back into mentorship, where we talk about peer-to-peer group mentoring. There needs to be someone in place who can challenge that bullying, who can become an ally for those students. And that person doesn't necessarily have to be on the free lunch program, quote unquote, themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But a student somewhere in the community walks past Gilmore Academy every day and says, man, I really would like to go there, but I know my parents can't afford it, so I'm afraid to even ask.
Right.
So I
How
wanted
do you
to
make yourself more approachable? How do you make it where advertising, financial whatever it is, right? So that people don't opt out.
right.
You focused for a bit on the concept of having an ally, and I think that's incredibly important. It has to happen every time something new is installed at a school. Like the first time you have a father and son outing, somebody on that staff has to be sensitive to the fact that not every student has a father.
Absolutely.
If you're going to do something with the prom, somebody on that staff has to be sensitive that there's not necessarily the economic diversity in our school. And maybe there are some kids who can't afford that. Somebody's got to be sensitive to every single decision that's made. And that's why ally, I think, is incredibly important.
Absolutely. That, and then the fact that we often make these decisions in a vacuum, absent of the people who are mostly affected. The decisions are made in these meeting rooms where we talk about those kids, and we talk about how would we like to have more of those kids in our hallways, how would we like to see that grow. But we don't invite their parents, we don't invite them. Kids line up outside. I've seen kids line up outside the fence line of a soccer field wishing they could get out there and play, and the coach never invite them to come over and kick the ball. So there has to be that. I mean, I also wanted to, and I don't want to take up the whole thing, but we talked about those different types of mentorship, and I wanted to kind of share my own testimony of mentorship. That I had a really great mentor at University of Texas in Austin that I got to spend a total of about 6 months with before he retired. Dr. King Davis, he was really awesome. He had a great impression on me, revolving around social justice policy, and really kind of lit a spark in me, right? And I followed him around everywhere, non-traditional student. I didn't really know how to fit in because most of the students were younger than me. And then I was the age of a lot of the faculty members there. But I was a student and an employee. So I was like, how do I take this on? And so one day I did get a chance to impart to him, tell him exactly how important it was that I had him to rely on as a mentor and as as a post for advice. And his eyes got really big and he got excited. He said, hey man, he said, what's crazy is that I never have figured I was mentoring you because we don't have a mentorship agreement, quote unquote. He said, I just always thought that we were really cool. And I enjoyed spending time with you because of this intergenerational transfer of knowledge that came from a guy at your generation level with the amount of wisdom you have to be able to impart things to me to make me feel young. So I didn't realize I was mentoring him while he was mentoring me.
Wow.
That's a great story.
That is fantastic. Oh
It
my
is.
goodness. Mr. Neem, if I pronounce your name correct?
I actually teach at Alice's school, Notre Dame.
Hi, I didn't see you.
I've been at Notre Dame for 30 years as teacher, and I went there for 3 years as a student, and I love our community. I've stayed because it's my family. And I am definitely one of those people who's, pardon my voice, I got my COVID shot yesterday and I'm a little under the weather. I'm definitely on board. I look at our school and think about some of the things that our teachers are doing and not doing, and some of the things our students are doing and not doing. And I see a bunch of untapped resources. We have the Moreau Mentor Program where seniors mentor our freshmen, but it's sort of and this is not to bag on the program. I think the program is great, but I think the program could be better, as all programs can be. And I think we're missing an opportunity. We have 4 seniors in the classroom with 10 freshmen, but really we only talk about announcements, and there's such an opportunity for our students to really be mentoring, for students, seniors or juniors with 10 freshmen, they could each have 2 of those kids or 3 of those kids and form a real relationship, which is not happening because it's awkward and they're nervous, and it's lunch once a month for half an hour and they're eating, and it's just not the right scenario for it to happen, but it could become the right scenario for it to happen. And I also think about, my own experience, and Alice, please, this is not an insult to you or admin in any way. I'm just sharing my own experiences. I teach English and sophomores, and I've seen lots of opportunities to introduce my students to different ways to be empathetic and have a growth mindset and learn about things that are potentially dangerous or troublesome to talk about. And I have been told by various people on various occasions across various years, no, 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 no. And I've said to my students, look, I'm going to the mat about this. I'm going to get called into the principal's office, and I'm okay with that because I think it's important. So there, as Alice knows, there have been times where we've, sort of, I don't want to say sneakily because it wasn't intended to be sneaky, but where we've tried something and have had a parent complaint, and where I've had to defend my choices. And I'm so happy to do that because the students always say how grateful they are that they've seen themselves in the literature, or that we have had a hard conversation. And I think it's really important from an adult standpoint. Like, I'm a grown-up, I'm 50 something, and the teachers that I deal with are sometimes my age, sometimes in their 20s. The students that we're dealing with are kids in some ways, but they want to be grown up, and they're getting so many influences that they don't know how to make sense of, that I feel like we have a real responsibility to have hard conversations and to be vulnerable about those hard conversations. Like, I've often started class discussions with, look, I'm not an expert and I don't have all the answers, but I think it's important that we talk about this and we will each make mistakes as we have this conversation, but we're going to nurture each other through the discussion from a place of love and empathy and growth mindset. So if I say something that comes out wrong, know that I'm thinking my way through the thought and that I only have the best intentions, but help me learn. And whenever I have done that, I do it pretty frequently, to be honest, the students just are so empowered and inspired and engaged that just the thought of me not being the most intelligent or well-rounded or knowledgeable person in the room really gives them the authority, I think, to step into that for themselves. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but I'm gonna I think I have good relationships with the kids. I think that they appreciate me. I think that when they leave my class, when they come into my class, they feel safe. And when they leave my class, they feel heard. And I think that's the most important thing that I can do in terms of mentorship.
Well, my opinion is if you don't piss off the parents on occasion, then you're not doing your job. Our school is just outside the
president, and piss off the president.
You know, it's true. Our school is just outside the city limits of Chicago, which means we have a lot of cop kids in our school because our schools are generally better than the city schools that are on the north side of Chicago. By some count, nearly half of our kids have either a police officer or some first responder, let's say, in their family. So when the George Floyd thing first happened and we had to deal with that, I knew I was going to piss off people somehow. But you know, how the hell do you explain to somebody that it's okay to kneel on someone's neck until the life is gone without upsetting somebody? But what I found, and you know, I'm going to relate it back to our Holy Cross charism. What I found is by relating it to both our core values and to actually biblical references to the gospel itself, you can bypass all that stuff. So when someone says, "Are you favoring so-and-so over the police?" No, I'm looking at our core value of dignity. I'm looking at our core value of inclusivity. If you relate it that way, you bypass all that nonsense, and it seems to work pretty well. But again, worried about pissing off parents? Nah, part of the job description.
You know, and I love that so much, Ralph, but it also brings into something Al touched on and Janine touched on as well for you, Alice, is to make sure parents are part of that conversation, right? I think one of the most powerful things we can do is include the parents in that transformation process, right? Both the parents that are coming in and the parents that you have there to kind of walk them through the same thing their children are going through in a way, right? Because you're going to need a lot of buy-in. You're going to need a lot of buy-in. And the best way to get that is to make sure that that child is hearing the same message from every place possible. But if the parents don't know what your messaging is, they are only hearing it from their child, right? Which honestly, as we know, can be, dangerous, right? It's so that's one thing I would definitely suggest is to start several parents group and have them involved and find different ways to kind of get the information out there in a way that the way you want to say it. That's the best way I can put it. Make sure that they're informed as well as part of this process, because it's important. Your young people are really going to need to feel safe and feel secure. And to do that, you're going to need the parents to feel safe and secure as well. I would strongly suggest coming up with a model, including the parents in that model. Even the ones that don't participate, you may want to find a way to, whether it's a letter from you, monthly, something to inform them.
We actually started with something like that. To be honest, Dr. Rodriguez, we've partnered with a group called Full Circle Consultants. They're a multi-ethnic group based on the science of child behavior. And we have monthly parent cafes, student cafes, and faculty cafes. The parent cafes are pretty well attended. I would say at least 40 to 50 families. And it is to talk about mostly issues of DEI work, which has been great. And they're optional. The student ones, same, probably 30 or 40 students, hit or miss. So it's not huge. And I think part of it is the middle of COVID, we're doing all of this via Zoom, right? I'm hoping that next year when we're in person, that momentum picks up. The faculty ones, and Deneen is one of the biggest allies here for this kind of work. That's disappointing. The faculty ones are completely under enrolled, and they're optional because that's what the consultants suggested. You know, I'm moving in the direction of going to have to make that a requirement, which seems ridiculous. That is my biggest concern. And Deneen, you can feel free to chime in on this. My fear is that in increasing the diversity of students and in doing so, recognizing that we've had to let things like entrance exams and whatnot slide, I do not want to perpetuate among this group of faculty that our kids of color are less than. And that is my biggest fear. I look at the number of kids of color in our AP and honors classes, and it's a concern. I look at the number of women, you know, in some of the AP and honors classes, and it's a concern. And that's going to take time. You can't change that stuff overnight, right? But if you're a faculty member and you're already resistant and you're looking at those numbers and not seeing kids of color in those AP and honors, right? You're making assumptions, and then you see kids coming in that perhaps are not as strong. You get where I'm going. Like, how do I approach it from education about standardized testing being biased? Do I approach it? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do I paint the picture that we are going to diversify, but please do not paint all children with the same broad, you know, strokes that you think kids of color are less than? How do I address that with faculty who are resistant?
Yeah, that's really a tough one, because one of the things I would ask is, do you understand why the faculty are resistant, right?
No.
That's the first place.
Yeah. but Deneen may have better. She's been there longer. They just like, they don't want to change.
But there's a reason behind that, right? There is
fear,
a reasoning behind that.
Fear. Let's be honest, right? It's always fear.
But you break that down to fear of what? What are you afraid of? Are you afraid that now your teaching style will be challenged? Or are you afraid that now the reputation of the institution that you have committed to is going to decrease? What exactly are you afraid of? Because you got to deal with that fear. You have to deal with it, or else that is an unmovable wall right now, right? Because you could tell them anything. You could throw the kit and caboodle and everything, every number, statistic at them. They're not hearing you because of that fear they have. And whatever it is, you got to boil it down and really, really get to the heart of it. I don't know if, and Deneen can maybe talk to it, do you have any allies right now who really support you, and why do they, right? And what are they hearing among their faculty? Right now, I know ultimately sometimes what happens is you get these splits of faculty, right? So the ones who support, you know, they're isolated from the ones that don't, right? But you really got to find a way. Maybe it's a anonymous survey. I don't know, but some way to really pinpoint what are the fear points that are stopping faculty from buying in, and again, then addressing it directly. And demonstrating why you don't have to be afraid of that point, not just acknowledging it, but making sure on your end, you are making sure whatever that fear is not reality.
Okay.
It's Alice, it's your responsibility, and it's your president's responsibility to make sure that the mission of the school is advanced. And the mission statement itself may not be a bad place to start with your faculty. Because if your faculty cannot support the mission, they shouldn't be working. Now, I've had, in the 6 years I was at Notre Dame, I had one conversation with one faculty member one time. And I said it bluntly that, if you feel that you cannot support this mission statement, you can't work here. Now you go home and think about it. And he came back and he said that he felt he could support it. I said, fine, we're fine. We're moving on from here, and let it go at that. But that might not be a bad way to open the door to the conversation, because our mission statements are pretty wide open, as are, and I don't know, how many core values you have at your school. We have 9. And that gives us plenty of room to choose from about which ones are going to be appropriate in this instance. But you can find a core value that can help you. And
We have a
really
DEI statement. I mean, we have gone so far. We've got our DEI statement. We are very clear about who we are going to be. Our young alums called us out for not having a statement in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. There was a very vanilla, no pun intended, statement that was put up eventually by our former president, who has retired since, and he didn't retire because of this. And the kids called us out. I mean, they absolutely did. And so we are not shy about the direction we are moving in. We are going to be better as an institution. I just, you said it perfectly when you said there's those that are all in and then those that aren't. And I saw Deneen go like this as well. I know she senses it and sees it too. And the hard part is I have no idea. I can't gauge how much momentum there is with those that aren't willing to move. You know, I don't know if it's a small group or if it's 50-50. But I do think addressing it by way of fear, as Dr. Rodriguez said, is wise. You know, what are we afraid of? Let's be honest and have those conversations, because we have had monthly professional development on DEI work. And as you all know, it takes time to get real with people. You don't just jump in and start having conversations about race. And I think people are frustrated by that. I think they want to dig deeper and they realize it takes time. So I think there's people like that. But then we've also got people that just don't want to have anything to do with it, you know, and that are sitting there like this the whole time. It's a challenge.
What if
go right ahead, I'm sorry.
What if we had the teachers who are clearly buying in be the freshman teachers? Because then there's not going to be any of that. I mean, I've never looked at a student's score on their entrance exam. I sort of think it's it's just sort of a number to me. And I've seen those kids who prepped for the entrance exam and, you know, they're great kids, whether or not they get a good score. But if we could make it so that the teachers who teach the freshmen are already the ones who have bought in, then by the time those kids become sophomores, the freshman teachers are like, oh my God, this is such a great group of students. And that will tell the sophomore teachers, oh, it's a great group of students. Yeah. That's all they'll know about them coming in. And so they'll have a good, you know, expectation of them. I think that if we can get our freshman teachers to be the ones who are open-minded and empathetic and not interested in, you know, placing kids into particular categories, then we could potentially bypass the problematic aspect of, you know, we don't want the kids to think that they're different and we don't want the teachers to think that they're different because of a test score. I mean, I have kids who are A students who sometimes don't do well on a quiz. That doesn't mean they're less of an A student. It means they had a bad day or a bad quiz. Like, it doesn't, I think we need people who have that mindset to be teaching those freshman students from that place of our Holy Cross mission.
Maybe what you've just said, Deneen, is the way to go, not to upset the apple cart and move everybody all around, but to pull those freshman teachers in ahead of time and have this conversation during orientation in August before we start. We want you to know this is the direction we've moved. And, or maybe we do it in June. And if you really feel like you can't commit to this mission, let's talk about moving you to a different level so that they're opting, they have to opt out, right? I love that idea.
Well, I think talking openly and authentically is very valuable, always, in almost every context.
I'm just going to plug my phone, plug it in.
Sure, thank you guys. What time's up? This has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you. One last thing I will tell you, Alice, is to, at some point, you may want to pull in the leaders of the, excuse me this language, the resistance.
Yeah.
And just have that conversation with them. If you can't fully identify who it is, I'm sure you can identify one or two again, excuse the language, ringleaders, you know, to have that conversation so, you know, they can serve as a go-between for, you know, the others. But thank you so much. I've had a wonderful time. Thank you, Al, for supporting me. It's been fantastic. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It's been fun talking with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Al, what institution are you with? Are you with the Holy Cross School?
I am. I am a doctoral student at St. Ed's.
Oh, great.
Yes, I'm in the inaugural cohort of EDD leadership students.
Oh, fantastic.
And,
How much longer do you have?
I have 1 year, basically a year and a half. Yeah. And
Excellent.
thank God, you know, God stay with me through this, you know. But I'm also serving on the facilitation committee for the Holy Cross Institute's strategic mission. And so I was going to chime in with you earlier to let you know that we're developing some paperwork, some really nice white papers, excuse my, but you know, some, you know, just some institutional guides that are going to stick close to the Holy Cross Constitution and align that with DEI initiatives to create, you know, to create and foster belonging across your organization, and to also help you to augment your mission statement if that's a necessity for you. You know, in many cases, you may need to necessarily, you know, do some cut and paste and that sort of thing. We want to make sure that people know that we're not in any place to litigate or create policy at the Institute, but we're just going to put together some things that you can incorporate in your own best practices. So I'm doing my thing, and I appreciate your prayers. If you just send up some timber for me, I'd appreciate that.
You got it, Alan. Thank you very much for your work here. And Michael, same with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
all.
Thank you so much.
Al, one last question since you're at the Institute. This year I'm going to have